don't know what's going on with the sound there, but hi, welcome to Fan View. My name is Sarah. Welcome to the show where we talk about something's going on. Something's going on. This is how we're live. This is how you know we're live, people. Welcome to the show where we talk about all sorts of pop culture things from the view of fans. My name is Sarah Cooper, and I'm joined tonight by Aaron. Hi, how are you, Aaron?
Good. We're getting massive feedback. I don't know what's going on there.
Good. Someone have it open in the background. Aaron, do you have it open? The Facebook window open?
No, I have everything. I have everything closed. Let me double check.
I'm just going to close everything in my background. Hopefully that helps. Something's going on.
I just put my sound on.
Oh dear.
So, okay.
As I said, these are the perks of being live. Perks of being live.
The perks of being live. So, how are you tonight, Sarah?
Yep. I'm good. How are you, Aaron?
I am good. I'm still getting feedback, but it's better than it was. Should we tell everyone you've got a bit of a migraine tonight, so a bit under the weather, and that wasn't feedback at all. That was just happening in your head.
That is, it is. It's just in here. Just in here. Yes, it's definitely Valkyrie in the background causing all of the issues.
Okay, it seems to be good now.
Yep. All right, so tonight we are talking about lost media, which with any luck this episode, or at least the start of this episode, will become. Aaron, you will be walking us through a lot of this, as this is much more your area of expertise than my own. So what would you like to start with?
Well, I think most people who are here are fans of different areas of either TV, comic, movie, some type of genre. And in most of the areas, if you're a fan, you can experience all of the different media from that creation. But with some things, there is actually missing media. So tonight we're going to be looking at missing episodes of TV shows, lost movies, stuff that is the most wanted to return, stuff that has come back over the last couple of decades, and rumors of stuff that's still out there. So if you're into your missing media, particularly things like Doctor Who, this is the episode for you.
Excellent. Well, Docky Who is always a good time. I think anyone who doesn't like Docky Who, or at least some of Docky Who, hasn't watched enough Docky Who. So we're starting with, I see we've got a slide here on Top of the Pops. So Aaron, tell us about this.
Well, this just isn't Top of the Pops. This is like a view of different shows that are gone. And when we talk about missing media, it isn't anything that in particular was targeted, and there wasn't one reason why it's missing. There's a whole range of different things that are missing. And this is from Hollywood movies to more recent TV shows and things like that, and some stuff that would surprise you. But I guess when it comes to our show, Fan View, what we're looking at is, I guess, the popular culture stuff. So the stuff people would know about and love, and would probably make companies quite a lot of money if it existed and was able to be released on streaming or DVD or Blu-ray or all those different things. And from there you can see some of the most wanted stuff, which is lost, which is Doctor Who. Top of the Pops, which was like a British version of Countdown. There was the Avengers, which is a show, not the Marvel Avengers, the English version of the Avengers, and a couple of other things. So we're going to have a broader look of how TV and movie was recorded and kept, why some of it was destroyed, where some of it's been returned from, and what the likelihood of other stuff coming back is.
Yeah, I should briefly touch on the fact that we have discussed, and we are now going to be doing a second episode next week, looking at lost media in the age of the digital media. So things like games, websites, all sorts of digital media that nobody thought to save. But for this week, yes, absolutely a focus on film and TV, which I think it's so sad. I think there's one of those things where everyone just kind of assumes these things will stick around and they'll stay, but there wasn't that view of preservation for a lot of media, especially TV, back in the day, and even very early film. And it is just a very sad thing that we've lost so much history just because nobody thought to archive it.
Yeah, So we're going to look at some of the reasons that happened as well, because it isn't anyone's fault in a lot of circumstances, and it's not something that people did deliberately and were malicious about. It's just the way things were.
Mm. Oh, absolutely. And I think I know that I've heard many stories of the fact that just to save on money, the master tapes would often get taped over again. So
Yeah,
they'd basically they'd have a tape, they'd record the show on it, they'd air the show, and then they'd reuse that tape. And in their minds, they was doing nothing wrong because there was no real demand for the rewatch at that time. And home
yeah.
video in a lot of the early instances wasn't exactly a thing. So they just thought we'll show it once and then it's done, once and done. Yeah.
Exactly. And also with the beginning of television, a lot of stuff went out live to air. So it was a lot like going and seeing a play. And no one ever thought of, keeping a play. You don't come home and have a copy of the play, and unless you're one of those people who took a camcorder in sneakily and, and recorded stuff. So it wasn't a big deal. It is just a big deal later when people who grew up with stuff want to see the stuff that they remember and then find that it hasn't been preserved.
Hmm. All right. So starting with, we've got this here. So a bit of a look at how is it that this happens? How is it that things get lost in the way that they do?
Well, we're going to be touching on both film and television, so video, and how it was originally recorded, how it was kept and archived. And of course, film comes, load the camera with a magnum of film, you film it, the editor edits the film together, you get a final cut, you get a negative from that, and then you print your copies and they go to the cinema. There's different types of film, and over the first half of last century, there were different kinds of films used. So you had the original black and white, and that came in different millimeter sizes, and then you had 2-strip color and 3-strip color and technicolor and all that kind of thing. And then you have your videotape, which was more of a television medium, and that was more of a live to air type of thing, where directors would be cutting from one camera to the other as they recorded stuff. So there was the videotapes and there was the films, and both of those are reliable archive mediums if you keep them, but unfortunately a lot of the early stuff wasn't kept.
I've also heard that a lot of early medium, especially film medium, was incredibly flammable. So it was very, very common for film to simply be destroyed due to basically them going to watch it and it catching alight, but that being the only copy, which is very sad.
Well, we'll look at some of the archive fires, but it was the early nitrate film, which would, if not kept under the right conditions, actually spontaneously combust. So that is not a good media to have stuff found on. And even when they find recoveries now of old nitrate film, they immediately put it onto a different format, so they don't have to deal as much as they can with the nitrate stuff. But that is the very early stuff as well.
William has chimed in saying in 1937 version of R3, it was on TV in Britain, very few TVs back then. And we've got a bit about some of those early broadcasts, and such as the Royal Wedding. The Royals had quite a few early broadcasts, didn't they?
Well, the Royal Wedding is an interesting one, because when they used to videotape stuff, it would go out live and it couldn't really be sent around. They had the original videotapes and that was the master. But the Royal Wedding, I think it was in 1947, yes, was actually the very first thing to be tele-recorded. Now, this is a process where they basically pointed a cinema camera at the television and they recorded what was on the screen. And once you've got a negative on film, then you can print copies and strike copies and send them around the world. And they considered the Royal Wedding such a newsworthy event that it was an experiment to do this. And now I don't know if you've ever tried to record anything off your TV screen, maybe with your phone or something like that. You get all these lines because it's out of phase. The amount of picture information that's showing on the screen is out of phase with what you will be recording on your device, so you'll get like lines and it won't come out perfectly. So it was quite a technical skill at the time to invent a system where they could point it at the screen and record it, and you didn't get like lines going through it, and the picture was of good quality. And they did it. It was such a big success that everyone, in Australia and around the world, in the Commonwealth, were amazed that they were able to even see these events pretty close to live, and that's like weeks and months after they happened, because the BBC did this experiment. Now, they didn't do this experiment to see if they could get the news of the royal wedding out there. They did it to see if there could be a commercial reason to record stuff and to get it out there and send it around the world. So it was the very beginning, at least in the UK, in England, of the commercial recording of television shows so they could be exploited overseas.
So just confirming, so that royal wedding, we are of course talking about the wedding of the Queen to Prince Philip?
We are, yes.
No, just making sure, because I know there were then Princess Margaret's wedding and things like that also got the televised treatment. So I wasn't actually certain which one. So I thought I'd just clarify that.
Yeah. There was huge controversy at the time as to whether there should be cameras in the wedding, because they weren't sure if something, the royals and the whole social hierarchy in the UK was like, oh, this is beneath your normal people being able to see it, so we can have a couple of photos and we'll come out on the balcony afterwards and wave. But to do that was actually the Queen's decision in the end. When the BBC approached her, it was quite breaking with royal protocol to let common people see what was happening during the wedding. So,
I suppose also, given it was the Church of England, that letting them into the church itself, which would generally be reserved for honoured guests and that type of thing. I suppose that's also a element, but a very interesting piece of history. That. Moving on. Yep. So we are moving on to American silent films, which again, that was the pre-celluloid age.
Well, this is one of those things. We're looking holistically at everything that's missing. And in the UK, we lost a lot of stuff, but in America, they lost a lot of stuff as well. And probably Hollywood and the whole American film industry really kickstarted a lot earlier than the rest of the world. Now, there were European filmmakers as well, and some of the early films were made in Europe too. But there's a quote here, I think it's from Francis Ford Coppola, which is quite amazing. More American silent films have been lost than have actually been preserved, and more than half of the sound films made in the US between 1927 and 1950 have vanished too. It's estimated that more than 90% of the films made before 1929 are no longer in existence. So that's some really shocking numbers. And the things I've highlighted there are two posters from Oscar-nominated movies. So these were popular movies, and they do not exist anymore because no one kept a copy. And along the bottom, there's a trailer that exists. So there's a trailer that exists for the first version of The Great Gatsby, which Scott Fitzgerald actually got to go along and see himself and wrote some reviews on, which were actually quite negative. And that doesn't exist either. The trailer exists. So there is an amazing amount of cinema and film media that does not exist anymore. And it isn't just niche cult stuff that a lot of collectors would like to see their Doctor Who episodes. There are quite great swathes of history that are just gone and not likely to ever be returned.
Yeah, it's like I was recently reading about the history of Betty Boop and the fact that the Boop Boopy Doop thing that was originated by a black performer named Little Esther. Unfortunately, Little Esther, somebody else claimed to be the original Betty Boop and tried to sue to get basically money for Betty Boop and the likeness and the Boop Boopy Doop, everything like that. Unfortunately, they then found this footage of Little Esther doing the performance about a decade earlier. And unfortunately, there is no remaining recordings of Little Esther. But she was, that from news articles, they found that she traveled the entire world and performed for, she performed for royalty and everything like that. But unfortunately, we can't see her legacy because it's just all gone. And it is very sad when you see things like that.
What William has said there is quite interesting, that the two episodes of Quatermass were test recordings, and they were. And Quatermass was expected to be quite a big hit, which it was. And they recorded the first two episodes, and it went out live, but they recorded it. And they stopped after episode 2 because when they looked, I think on episode 2, there is a fly on the screen through the whole episode, and they couldn't remount episode 2 without the fly, so they didn't bother recording the rest of it. And that's how haphazard and how these things happen, where something as random as a fly being on the screen means that the rest of that science fiction classic was not ever recorded and will never ever turn up. It went out live, so there's no opportunity for it to ever turn up. So
that's very sad.
some of the different circumstances that happened over the years. Now, what you were mentioning earlier about the nitrate fires, there have been over the years, going right back to the beginning of last century, huge fires in archives because a lot of the film was silver nitrate and very, very combustible, and even under the wrong situations, it would self-ignite, so it would combust. And there were huge fires in Hollywood, in the Universal Studios, in MGM Studios, in 20th Century Fox Studios, right up into the 70s. So it really does show you how much of a problem this was and how hard it was for the studios to deal with this. The trouble is it costs a lot to preserve film, and if you start getting thousands and thousands of film and you can't really exploit them for any monetary purpose, it becomes a burden on the studios to upgrade, I guess, the conditions that they're kept in. The trouble with some of this is you might have, 10,000 films in an archive, and some of them are the only ones that exist. And you might have a lot of stuff that no one really cares about, but it's all stored together in the same place. And if some of it goes up, you lose all of it. And I think Dags put up as Sci-Fi's own comment before, only if we could have London After Midnight. And that is one of those movies that is a classic Lon Chaney movie. And a lot of people do remember it because it was such a classic movie. And that the last copy of that was burnt in 1976. So it just missed the video age and stuff like that. So it was sitting in an archive up until that point. And it should be a movie that exists because it was a popular movie, but all the copies were called back. They kept the best copy of it, and then the archive was destroyed, and that's the end of that.
Oh, that's devastating. Sci-Fi Zone, which is, of course, Dags, has just chimed in saying a lot of George Millet's films were melted down to make soldier boot soles for World War One, as noted in the film Hugo. That's very much a sign of the times. And, in those ages where those periods where there was such poverty and such demand for raw materials, it is understandable that they would do something like that. And we have seen throughout history that in times of distress and duress, basically the arts do get put by the wayside, essentially, for survival, which is understandable, but still incredibly sad.
It is, and it is amazing with the criteria they went to picking what was archived and what wasn't archived, so what was kept and what wasn't. And often it would be news and historical events were the things that were archived and kept, and things like kids shows and dramas and comedies weren't, because they weren't seen as important. And of course, when you have something which happened in the UK with the BBC, when there's all these royal marches and stuff like this, where they might have the changing of the guards that is filmed and things like that, they filmed and kept the same thing every single year for 100 years, which no one is ever going to want to watch again. Yet a lot of these shows that people grew up with and loved were just, counted as fluff and not recorded and were destroyed.
No, that's very sad, and especially I think part of it would definitely come down to, especially with the later sci-fi and things like that, and popular culture as well. They did not really value it. They didn't value it in the way. So certain things probably were starting to be preserved, but sci-fi and pop music, no, that's not a priority. That's something that is just made as pulp. It's made to entertain the masses cheaply and quickly. But not something that's worth preserving. And it really does say a lot about attitudes. It's very interesting seeing what is preserved and what isn't, because I know that in preservation, there are two types of things that get preserved. Things that people know to preserve because they think that's important, we need to preserve it, and things that basically get preserved due to neglect, which is people forget about it. So there's something very common in fashion history, where you see tiny little dresses and tiny clothes get preserved. And a lot of people have misunderstood and think, oh, that's because the people that, wore those dresses, people used to be smaller. But it's not actually because of that. It's because these were dresses that were so small that you couldn't give them as hand-me-down to anyone. You couldn't pass them on to anyone. This person was abnormally small, so their clothes have just sat in a wardrobe with mothballs for 50 years, and as a result of that, we can now put them in a museum and preserve them. And I think that's the type of thing that we are getting here.
one of those cases is one of the best finds of, I guess, movie shorts and stuff in America was back in I think it was the 20s. A YMCA was getting upgraded, and they were going to fill in the swimming pool to make a new hall over the top. And rather than fill it in with dirt, they decided to get rid of the movie archive. So they filled it up with all the films and stuff, and then they did fill it up with dirt and leveled it off and covered it over. And because it was so cold, the dirt turned into permafrost. And it wasn't till about 80 years later, when they dug it up to redevelop the whole area, they found this swimming pool full of all these original films, and they were the only examples of a lot of comedy shorts and other things. So it is one of those cases where trying to get rid of stuff actually preserved it.
And it's fascinating how that does happen, and it'll be very interesting to see, you know, in another 100 years, what's left of what we value today. Yeah. So moving along. So we're talking about things being junked.
So again, we're mainly looking, I guess, at the BBC, because this is it was a different it was a different issue in America to England. In America, when we got to the 60s, they started to syndicate stuff, and it meant that any series over there that had the correct number of episodes suddenly was sold to a whole lot of other stations and shipped around. So American TV from the 60s is a lot more complete than British TV. It isn't 100% complete. There are missing shows over there, and there are the same issues. But the BBC literally were, I guess, hands were tied by the unions as to what they could actually do. It was impossible for them to repeat stuff after about 18 months, because union rules meant that was taking work away from actors and things like that. So once it was outside that original runtime, they had to renegotiate with everyone in the production, and they all had to be paid again. So it was like paying for the whole production again just to see a repeat. So it was very commercially unviable for them to keep everything, especially on the original videotapes. It became the point where the tapes themselves were worth more than the media that was recorded on them. So they kept the tapes for quite a while, and then they got to the point where they couldn't exploit it, they couldn't sell it overseas, they couldn't repeat it, so they really had no reason to keep it. And the only reason stuff exists, we were talking earlier about telerecording, is because BBC Enterprises had started out, and even for them, they could sell it overseas for a few years, and then after that, it came back and was destroyed. So we can see in that picture that we just had, there was two ways that things were destroyed. Up the top corner there, that friendly-looking machine is called the bulk eraser. Now, that was for original videotapes. So they didn't erase videotapes by putting it over and recording static on it or something. They just put it in this huge electronic magnet that basically would wipe everything in one go, one at a time. So there is no Doctor Who from the 60s that exists. The videotapes were all, they know where every single one of those tapes went because it was catalogued and they were so expensive. So all of those were erased, with some of them within weeks of the episodes being recorded. Some of them lasted quite a while, but the earliest Doctor Who that exists on original videotape is the colour John Pertwee episodes from Ambassadors of Death. The other stuff you see there is the bandsaw. Now, the telerecordings got sent all over the world, and there was two things that you could do after you had shown them and the rights were up. You could send them back to the BBC and they'd go back into BBC Enterprises archives, or you could sign a thing saying that they've been destroyed. So you'd have a bandsaw, which is just a saw, and you would put the whole tape through it and cut it in half and then throw it out that way. Now, there have been stories of the people who were doing this were so distressed that they have thrown episodes out in dump masters for people to go and collect and save. But generally, it was quite a thorough process. So all the videos are gone. Most of the overseas tapes were reels of film were gone. So the only thing that exists is stuff that got sent back to the BBC, and they did destroy it themselves, but they didn't always destroy it straight away, or the things that were basically pinched or wound up in fans' hands, and that does happen.
No, from time to time, of course. Very briefly touching on what William said, he mentioned E.T. the game, a very famous example of that being used to pave roads in Japan.
Yes.
Fun fact, they disposed of so many copies of that game that it's actually very hard now to get a copy of that game. So they actually had the opposite effect, basically, by doing that. Yeah, now it's rarer than ever. But we are going to avoid that topic a little bit and try and focus on that next week when we will be talking about games and digital media.
I was just going to say, we'll look at that next week because that's a really interesting one. So you can see there's piles of film that's been chucked out and junked. The other thing they used to do when film cans were quite expensive, so they'd often send it on a core, which is basically the film isn't actually on a spool. It's just the film on a core in the middle, and then it's taped off. And if you knock the core out of the middle, then the whole film, corkscrews out into a dump master, and they did that with a lot of the films as well. So they were quite thorough and had many and various ways of destroying this stuff that they obviously spent a lot of money to produce in the first place, but mainly because there was no way to commercially exploit it at the time.
Yeah, look, it's very sad seeing things like that, but at the same time, it is understandable. You still see that type of thing, honestly, these days with often film promotional material and things like that. They can't give it away to fans and things like that at the end of the cinema release. You often see in things like that in cinemas where they literally have to destroy it at the end. And I've also heard cases of bookshops having to destroy the books. When rather than they have two choices: send it back to the publisher for destruction when it basically runs out of print, or destroy it and provide proof that it has been destroyed. Both very, very sad options, but yeah, there you go.
That it is the way business works a lot of times.
Yeah, so, you can't write it off. You can't write it off if it's still in one piece.
Exactly. So this is personal to me. I had no idea what missing material was. Being a Doctor Who fan, I didn't know the list of Doctor Who episodes apart from what was listed in the front of Target books, which was basically the other books that were in the series. I did not know, from the 60-odd Target books that were in the series, there was probably, 300 stories at the time or whatever. And I didn't know until 1981. So a magazine came out, Doctor Who magazine. It was a winter special, and it had the list of what was in the Doctor Who archives. And not just myself, but Doctor Who fans in general found out for the first time not every episode existed. And actually, at that point, there were actually about 150 episodes that were missing from the archive, and most of what was considered the classic stories were missing. And so this was a big, big shock at the time to Doctor Who fans. I wasn't in the Doctor Who fan community at the time, but even I was quite surprised that all these stories I'd read the books of and thought the ABC would eventually repeat, that I was never going to be able to see. And there's an interesting letter there. Now, I don't know if anyone would have done this project at school. I think a lot of schools did it. Write a letter to someone you admire or someone famous or something like that. It was an English thing. And I remember growing up that we did it. It was probably, if it was 86, so it'd be year 7. I remember it being primary school. It must be year 7. I wrote to the BBC because the ABC had just shown a run of Doctor Who episodes in colour that magazine didn't exist in colour. I didn't know in the couple of years between that coming out and the ABC showing it that they had found it. But I got a letter back from the ABC from, I think it's Michael Bryant in the archive department, thanking me for reporting it and saying that they would contact the ABC to see if they had any missing material. And the cool thing about that, all my friends who wrote to Michael Jackson and Madonna, they didn't get any replies, and I was the only one in class that got a reply from the BBC. So I have had an interest in missing episodes just about my whole life. Everyone knows I'm a big Doctor Who fan, and it is one of those things that probably is on the most wanted of every Doctor Who fan, or the biggest news is when a missing episode gets returned.
Yeah, look, I know that anytime I hear about it, I remember hearing about the signal that reflected back off the stars, which seemed like a very fitting way for footage, sound to return.
Well, that's something that people have been speculating for ages. I don't know if anything has ever been recovered from that, but I'm sure if we've got these telescopes that can look 30 billion years into the past, finding a couple of Doctor Who episodes out there isn't going to be too far into the sci-fi realms in the future. Who knows?
Come on, scientists, get on it. All right, moving right along. What have we got here?
So when I was growing up, it was interesting. It was different from where it is now. because I wasn't so obsessed with Doctor Who, I'd get the magazines, and every couple of months there'd be news of more episodes returned. Some have been found in Africa. Some have been found in a Mormon church basement. Some have been found in private collections. So you would have every couple of months, or maybe twice a year, a couple of episodes had returned. So for me, it wasn't a case of the Doctor Who episodes are always going to be missing. It was, they're out there, and it'll just take a couple of years with the BBC searching the globe, and they're all going to come back. And through the mid and early 80s, it was quite good. You would hear of stuff that was coming out every 6 months or so. And the difference was, back then, home video hadn't really taken off, so it didn't really matter if it was in the archives or not. It was nice that it was, but unless the ABC repeated it, there was no way you were ever going to see it. So a lot of Doctor Who fans probably weren't as invested in the episodes returning as they are now. And this is all media and all fandoms, really, because there was no way you were ever going to see it, especially in Australia. In England, they have an organisation called the BFI, which holds special weekends and have cinema screenings of things like that. But in Australia, that's unheard of. So even when something was returned, it was like, nice, that's returned, but we're never ever going to see it. But through the whole 80s, there was a steady return of missing episodes of not just Doctor Who, but other shows as well. But towards the end of the 80s, kind of all the avenues where researchers were looking and TV stations overseas and where it had been sold kind of dried up. So instead of getting, 1 or 2 episodes a year come back, there was a couple of good finds towards the end of it. As William said again, Tomb of the Cybermen, which was like one of the best finds of all. But they started to dry up, and we can see here are some of the returns from the Doctor Who. You had The Evil of the Daleks Part 2 and the full Tomb of the Cybermen, and then later we've had the Abominable, the Web of Fear as well. Tomb of the Cybermen was a particularly interesting one because that was all 4 episodes. It didn't come from a collector. It came from the Hong Kong TV archives, and that meant that it was rushed released to video, and they found it, and it was on video within about 3 months, which is absolutely amazing. Now you jump forward to the last couple of episodes that have been found, and they were announced and they were available for streaming the same day as they were announced that they were found. So technology has definitely changed the way that we see the media as well. It is just a pity that all this was destroyed before the technology came along to be able to distribute it like it is today.
No, that's very fascinating, all of that. Ooh, have I got the same slide twice? Yes, I do have the same slide twice. I apologize. We have our own missing media. In this case, it's a missing slide. So yes. I do apologize for that.
So we're not just looking at all the Doctor Who stuff. We're looking at other stuff that's been returned as well. And there have been some huge finds that I guess culturally very significant through, especially, the film industry over the years. There was one not so long ago, I think Dan was saying, about stuff turns up in people's garages. A Three Stooges short turned up in Australia that did not exist and had been missing for 80 years, and it turned up in a guy's shed in Australia. But one of the more interesting things that got into the media more recently was when the extended cut of Metropolis appeared. Now, Metropolis is one of those seminal science fiction movies from the silent era, and it's always existed, but it's always existed as a cut version of the movie. And a lot of times when these movies were created, studios would often cut them down, and sometimes even the exhibitors would cut them down if they thought they ran for too long. Now, this often means that the episode or the film that everybody knows and the copy that is around is not a complete version. And there's a lot of classic movies that people don't realize aren't complete. I myself did not realize Metropolis was missing material until the news came that they'd found a complete version of it. And this was interesting because this version came from 1929. There was I think it was a studio or a cinema in Argentina requested the full version. They got the full version to show, and they never sent it back. And it went to the basement of that cinema until I think the 60s. And then in the 60s, it was bought by a private collector. And then the private collector sold it to a museum. And then the museum didn't even bother checking to see what it was. It was just a print of Metropolis. And then it wasn't until the 2000s when they actually checked it and found it was 25 minutes longer than the longest known existing version that they
Wow.
found all the cuts from Metropolis, and so it actually fixes up a whole lot of plot details where people wonder why different events were happening. It inserts characters back in, and it gives them motivation for what's happening on screen. So that was one of those amazing finds, and it also is one of those things that gives me hope about more Doctor Who coming back, because if something from, you know, the silent era turns up 100 years after it was meant to be destroyed, Doctor Who, that they stopped destroying it in the late 70s, and in 1978 they actually started getting it back. Maybe there is hope for more of that coming back than we may think.
Fingers crossed. And you never know what is in private collections, especially with film. With TV,
Yeah.
I know that it's a lot harder, but with film, you never know. Dags has just commented the Argentina version was on 16 millimeter and not 35 millimeter. So the
Yes.
quality isn't as good, but it added a lot of missing scenes. And that is also another thing that does sometimes happen, where unfortunately the quality you get for the restoration, it's not what you would hope for. And sometimes, unfortunately, especially with modern things, you'll see that they never bother to release it because they say, oh, it costs too much to upscale it, which
Yes.
is very disappointing for fans.
One of those things where missing episodes impacted on my view of other stuff is, you know what, you watch those CSI episodes where they have a fuzzy out of thing picture of someone in a mirror or a number plate, and they go, let's put it through the upscale software, and it becomes crystal clear. Well, I said on a forum, well, why don't they use that technology to improve like the bad prints of stuff? And they go, because that technology doesn't actually exist.
Yeah.
So all those movies and films are lying to us.
Technically, we do have it now due to neural networks and AIs, but it is entirely possible that when you upscale something, it will add in details that should have never been there. So that is what you see now with those AIs. Earlier today, actually, I was watching Death Becomes Her, and Death Becomes Her has a very interesting fact that they originally had a couple of other actors in there, including Tracy Ullman was meant to have an entire subplot, and none of that footage exists. That was an original, they had an original ending with Tracy Ullman, a whole character, a whole cast. There's multiple reports of people seeing that version of the film, but that version of the film and those scenes have never ever been released to the public. And yeah, that's a more modern example of the fact that they are still doing it. There still is content that gets cut away, and unfortunately, then it is us, the viewers and consumers, that do miss out.
You can actually see, and this shocked me because I thought he wouldn't do this. You can find a video of Peter Jackson from the making of Lord of the Rings, where they show them burning all the alternate takes and extra scenes and stuff because he didn't want the studio coming in and changing his movie around later. And I was just shocked. I thought he would keep that in his personal archives. But there are a lot of filmmakers that do that. Stanley Kubrick was absolutely notorious for doing that. And fans would love to see there's Doctor Strangelove ended with a pie fight originally, and that's gone. And there's deleted scenes from Close Encounters. And he personally made sure that all of those were destroyed and don't exist because he never wanted them coming to light. So that's another reason why stuff doesn't exist sometimes, because the actual creators of it do not want that version out there.
Maybe we should have done that to George Lucas, but that's just my opinion.
Him.
All right, moving right along.
So another one.
Avengers, yes.
Yes. So this is when I put the Avengers, everyone thinks Marvel Avengers, but no, the Avengers was a much loved British detective sci-fi show, and the first series of that had no hope of ever being returned because it went out live, and then this has turned up in weird places. They've got a couple of different episodes of the Avengers. One of them turned up in the American Library of Congress, and they do not know how it got there because it wasn't even meant to be filmed, but one of the bigger recoveries in the last few years was an episode called Tunnel of Fear that was bought in a private collection. So the Avengers, most people know, is Steed and Mrs. Peel or Kathy Gale, but this is the earliest series, Series 1, which has Ian Hendry, and they are avenging his fiance's murder. And this was what started off the Avengers, but no one, I think 18 episodes or 26 episodes in the first series, and only about 3.5 of them exist. So it is one of the most wanted TV shows. Everything from Series 2 exists in full, but Series 1 had nothing existing, and then over the last couple of decades they found 3 episodes. So Avengers is one of those most wanted TV shows, and occasionally they have had recoveries of it, and it shouldn't exist, but there you go, it does.
There's always somebody who wants to personally archive things, or some mega fan that finds a way.
Exactly. It is. You do wonder when stuff goes to air live how they manage to get tele-recordings if no one was paying to have it done or whatever. But something was lost in the mists of time, and obviously someone did it because the episodes are there to watch.
Yeah, and thankfully that is the case. So yeah, we've also got episode 847 of Sesame Street. Tell us a bit about this one.
Now, this is one of the coolest things ever, and again, I love missing television, and I had not heard of this, but apparently in the 1970s, I think it was 78, there was an episode of Sesame Street which had Margaret Hamilton, not Margaret, as the witch from The Wizard of Oz. Anyway, was it Margaret Hamilton? She came back and played the witch again. And Sesame Street often had lessons for kids, and they would have lessons about feelings and emotions and things like that. And they decided to do one on fear. And for the fear one, they got the Wicked Witch of the West, and she came on in character and played the same character again. And it was basically about her broom blowing into Sesame Street and then her turning up to get it back and being incredibly mean and horrible to characters before they all get along and the episode ends nicely. The trouble was, it freaked the kids out that watched it so much. More complaints than any episode of anything on kids' television at the time. So basically, it was shown once, it was taken out of the overseas packages to be sold internationally, and it was never put in the repeats of episodes in America either. And this meant that it wasn't accessible, and later people who remembered it, the Children's Television Workshop even denied that it had been made and it existed. And one photo in the bottom left there of the witch with
Oscar the Grouch?
The Grouch turned up, so they then couldn't deny it, but they said it wasn't in the archives. And then again, to cut a long story short, someone found it in a library archive. So how they got it, if they do suspect someone must have actually leaked it from the Henson archives for it to get out. But this episode of Sesame Street, which was controversial, a lot of people's dim memories, I watched it a couple of days ago, and I thought it was an amazingly charming piece of television, but I could also understand why it would have freaked and scared little kids out, particularly every time the Wicked Witch appears. There is this really jarring discord electric guitar music, which I would have gone as a kid, that would have been so freaky. There are other parts of Sesame Street that have been taken out of episodes. Often, they have the little cartoons or something. There was one for a while that was missing, which was an animation of a crack behind the door, and then the crack in the kid's imagination turns into a monster. And that again was deemed too scary for kids after it was shown, but it was just cut out of an episode because it's a 30-second little thing, and then that turned up on YouTube as well. So these things do come and go, but it is amazing the breadth of different material that has been lost. It isn't just one genre or movies or television, it's kids television right through to Oscar-winning movies.
It's great seeing that, because especially the Wicked Witch of the West, Margaret Hamilton, she has been horrifying and scaring children for decades. I remember once asking my father what the first movie he ever saw in cinemas was, and it was it was Wizard of Oz. Not long after it came out, my dad was quite old, and he told me that he had nightmares about the flying monkeys. So there it is, tormenting and terrifying children throughout the ages.
It is interesting because she was a school teacher, and her whole life had been had kids scared of her, and she did the Sesame Street because she actually wanted to address that and try and make it so kids didn't see her as a witch, and it just reinforced it. So it didn't really work for her so well.
Bless her. So yeah, we're moving back on to Top of the Pops again. So we've got a couple of performances that have been tracked down, including, I see, Elton John. I thought that was David Bowie, but it doesn't appear to be. Tell us about this, Aaron.
Yep, so Top of the Pops is one of those which is, again, on a lot of people's most wanted list. When you look at I think it's the top 100 shows that people want returned, Doctor Who is number one. Top of the Pops is actually number two. And this is because, much like sci-fi fandom, music fandom has huge communities that follow the groups and collect everything and obsess with it. The interesting thing about Top of the Pops, everything was done live. So you got a lot of live performances of acts that no other live performances exist of, and you had them all on the show. So it's a bit like Countdown for anyone in Australia who remembers the music shows, but it was a lot older than Countdown and had a lot of really famous acts. So there's the Beatles and the Stones, and you've got Pink Floyd, which was a big recovery they had recently, and they did recover David Bowie in a fantastic colour clip. I didn't use a picture from it here, but Top of the Pops has come back from a lot of interesting sources, and it is one of those things where they don't really find episodes because it wasn't something that was sold overseas a lot or wasn't meant to be. But a lot of the stuff that has been returned, apparently a BBC studio technician was really into music. So when the shows were on live, he was recording them and keeping them and taking them home. And then there was a lot of other music fans who had very, very early versions of home video recorders. So pre-beta and VHS, the old pneumatic tapes and different formats. And they would tape particular performances of their favorite acts as well. So what was highly illegal at the time, these people are now seen as almost heroes for retaining this media. And it was, what people don't understand, it was incredibly illegal at the time, to the point where people were prosecuted over owning stuff that was broadcast on TV. And the very famous case, there was a celebrity over there I don't think you would have ever heard of, called Bob Monkhouse. And he was kind of, I guess, like a Tony Barber or something that did game shows. And he particularly loved movies and comedies, and he collected a lot of the original prints. And the police raided his house, stole his, confiscated his entire collection, and he had to go to court. And it changed the rules of people owning media, where you could own it, but you couldn't exploit it for commercial gains. And a lot of collectors went underground because of this, because it was a big high-profile case. And he did not get all of his material back. So when the case was over, he was meant to get it all back, and he didn't. And this is another one of the reasons why some people who have private collections were very reluctant to go forward and offer them back, because they faced prosecution for having the stuff that the actual companies wanted back.
Oh, that's very sad, especially given, if they didn't have it, nobody would. William has said, I follow Missing Believed Wiped on Facebook. The amount of stuff I've heard of, incredible.
Yeah. So they are one of there's a Missing Believed Wipe event once a year in the UK where they basically show all the best stuff that's been recovered. And some years it is an absolute bonanza, and some years you're like, that's a bit sad, where the only thing that's been recovered is like continuities on the end of movies and things recorded live. So it is one of those potluck things. Okay, what you really want is when Missing Believed Wipe says there's a 30-minute secret slot, prominent science fiction, then everyone goes along, because they have surprised people with missing Doctor Who episodes a couple of times.
Yeah. So Dags has just chimed in to say Roddy McDowell was into copying films onto video for preservation and was pinged by the copyright police for it. So sad. That said, I wonder these days, especially with people having huge digital libraries, I wonder how what would happen if somebody went after them for that, because I do know a lot of online communities that, that is just entirely what they do. They just work on preserving and keeping media of any sort. I wonder if the authorities are going to come after them. Hopefully not.
Well, hopefully not. There's probably, with the digital stuff, there's a lot of stuff we can talk about next week as well that kind of goes over into that era, but it's a really interesting thing to look at. I'll go into it next week, but here's another interesting one that is missing: Alfred Hitchcock's second film. So you would think such a prominent director who had such success, all his films would exist, but his second film, The Mountain Eagle, which is basically the drama and lives of people living in the mountains, and it had quite good reviews, doesn't exist. And it is one of those things where, I guess it is an older movie and it is one of his earlier ones, but even at the time he was recognized as one of the greater directors of his time. And when this movie came out, it was one of the ones that helped him fast track onto his career. There are rumors with this one, though, that he himself didn't like the movie, so was quite happy to have every copy of it destroyed. And we've talked about that a little bit before, where some of the creators of these movies don't like them. And it does come down to the fact, well, you might not like what you've created, but your fans probably do. So how much of a right does a creator have to their work once they put it out there. Can you put something out and it has a really good reaction? You go, no, 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 and try and pull it back in and have no one ever see it again. It is a really weird ethical thing for, I guess, a creator that doesn't like what they've put out.
Yeah, I think it very much comes down to the whole death of the author thing, that once you release your work into the world, you no longer really have ownership over it as much as you might want to. It's gone. You've put it out there. It is now in the hearts and minds of everyone else that has consumed and observed it. So yeah, you can't really then say, no, I don't like it, I want it to go away. It's no longer your role.
Yeah, it is crazy. And so what is also lost, which I have known about this one for a while, but what surprised me, there is a spider pit sequence in the original King Kong. Now, if you've seen the Peter Jackson King Kong, there is the scene where they all fall down into that sort of gooey mud full of bugs and kind of get eaten. It is the same kind of thing happened in the original King Kong, where when they're crossing a bridge, which is just a big fallen log, Kong comes along, shakes it, and half of them fall down into this valley, and a couple of the guys manage to cling onto the side and get back up. That is the version I've seen. The version that actually happens is you see all these people fall into the pit. Some of them die on impact because it's such a long drop. The ones that survive, all these stop motion spiders and bugs come out of the walls and basically finish them off. Now, the really interesting thing about this is I feel like I have seen this because Peter Jackson recreated it in full, and you can watch it on YouTube. And I feel that it has done so authentically to how it would have originally been made. I've seen that sequence now. So even though it was lost for years and years and years and they have never recovered it, Peter Jackson's jittery stop motion recreation using the original actors, the CG and stuff, is good enough that I kind of go, well, that really isn't missing, even though it is.
Yeah, recreated well enough that it might as well be back. And that is the other interesting thing, where some media, while it is lost, has been recreated. And I think that's also an interesting thing when people are not able to find the original material, but they're able to find old scripts, or in the case of Doctor Who, the audio recordings, so they were able to make the animated specials and things like that.
The thing we haven't really touched on as well, there's telesnaps where a person offered a service mainly for actors to take pictures of what they were in off air, and then they could use it in their resume. But a lot of BBC directors actually used it as well for their resumes. So a lot of Doctor Who, which doesn't exist, there's telesnaps, which is like 30 or 40 pictures of the episode that exist as well. So there is a lot of different ways so it has been preserved. And the other thing I was thinking of, every single episode of Doctor Who exists as an audio print. So you can listen to all of them. So if you are actually blind, every episode of Doctor Who exists.
Very, very true. Very true.
Yeah. So there are still 97 missing episodes of Doctor Who. And out of all the things that are searched for on television, Doctor Who is the most hotly debated as to what is still out there, what will be recovered, when it's coming back, if it will be recovered, and what condition it'll be in. And there's a lot of rumors out there about what's out there. Is it coming back? Where's it coming from, kind of thing. Colin has said, remember George Lucas wanted to destroy all the copies of the Star Wars Holiday Special. I think fans wanted to destroy copies of the Star Wars Special as well. I have heard that.
What would we wouldn't know about Lumpy, and Lumpy is such an important character for the Star Wars canon.
Yes. Dags might be able to confirm this. I don't know if it's an urban legend or not, but they used to go after fans that had 16 or 35 mil prints of Star Wars and actually make them destroy them in front of them. You weren't allowed to own a print of Star Wars at all. I don't know if that's an urban legend, but I heard it from a few people that the Lucasfilm police knocked on their door and said, we've heard you've got a print of Star Wars, give it up or we're going to prosecute. So this is the difference in media collecting now from what it was 20, 30 years ago. We're talking about, I guess, Doctor Who rumours, though, and for any Doctor Who fans who are following, the big sort of thing that has happened over the last 20 years now is all the rumours kind of congealed together into one big rumour called the Omni rumour. And this is one of those really interesting things where, being a Doctor Who fan, I never believe any of the rumors about missing episodes because anyone can make them up. They go through the whisper networks, and when you get them, they're often, totally fabricated and not true. And so I have friends who even work in the industry who I would be hearing rumors from, and I'd be thinking, that's fantastic, thanks for telling me, but I'm not getting my hopes up because none of the rumors I ever hear come true. Now, mostly correct, cinemas were supposed to destroy all pre-special edition copies of Star Wars. Yes, and there's a whole episode on the restoration and the despecialized editions right there.
Yeah.
The Omni rumor was different because stuff that I was hearing, and indeed other fans were hearing, actually started to sound more and more likely, and it got to the point where people who were in the know were asked about these rumors, and they either clammed up or said really unusual stuff that was not an outright denial and almost a confirmation in a double negative kind of way. So I, over the years, and they still haven't returned, but they possibly could, heard that Power of the Daleks was found and damaged on an Ascension Island army base. And this is going back quite a long time, but the people who told me this eventually told me other stuff that was spot on true. So what they heard, I believe they were passing on as accurate rumors or what they were hearing. There was a distribution hub found in Ghana. The film there was in variable condition. Now, the interesting thing about this is the Omni rumor goes back to one guy, Phil Morris, who has actually been searching Africa and was quite open that he was searching Africa until he wasn't open about it anymore and things went really dead quiet. And he was responsible. We talked about earlier the returns of some of the other episodes. He was responsible for those, and those returns were among the stuff I was told was recovered in the Omni rumor, amongst a lot of other stuff that still hasn't been returned. Now, I guess you can say if someone says everything's been recovered, then when something is recovered, they're going to say, well, I told you I said that. But it's a bit more complicated than that from where I was hearing it from and what people were saying. So the Omni rumor has a lot of speculation and still isn't finished, to the point where he will not say what has been found, where he went, what the actual outcome is, if it's still the search is on or what. But the upshot of it is I can't complain about him, because in the last 10 years, he has been the person who has given back the most episodes of Doctor Who. Probably one of the greatest finds ever, along with Tomb of the Cybermen, was the Web of Fear. And the Web of Fear and Enemy of the World were given back almost 10 years ago now. So it's been a long time between drinks, because nothing else has come back since. And they were hailed as fandom as one of the greatest recoveries ever. And Enemy of the World is interesting because it's set in Australia, which is very unusual for early Doctor Who. And Web of Fear is recognised as one of the most classic episodes ever, with Yetis in the underground.
Wow. William has just chimed in saying, whatever has been discovered will take years to restore, so don't expect any new releases soon. And unfortunately, that does sound like it is probably pretty accurate.
Well, I've heard a lot of it is to do with money, which is often a lot of what holds things up. And
that's also true, yeah.
I was told, this is an interesting little thing. The Spanish gold ships that used to transport all the wealth of Spain around some have sunk and have been looked for decades and decades and decades. Now, apparently, one was announced as being found, one of the richest ones, about 10 years ago. But what they didn't say, it was actually discovered in the 80s, and it was off the coast of Madagascar, and the Madagascan government changed the rules of salvage because they wanted to own it, and then other international people put their hand forward. So it wasn't even released until 20 years after they found it, and they actually finally leaked it because the people who had found it weren't getting anywhere with trying to negotiate with the government. So this is what I've heard is the issue with the Doctor Who episodes, where it is just all tied up in red tape, legalities, and mainly money, and no one's shifting on anything. So it'll take something happening to budge anything free. But I guess we will be seeing what happens eventually.
Yeah, no, that is very upsetting when that type of thing happens. We have one final slide for tonight.
So right on time. The future.
Yeah.
So I often get asked, what are the rumors I'm hearing at the moment? So here are the ones that are doing the rounds currently. More episodes. Yeah, more episodes returned from Africa. Possible. Probably the most likely, because I do believe Phil Morris has more episodes that he's recovered from there. Again, when we get them, who knows? 2 to 7 known to be in private hands. Now, this is really interesting. The BBC has come forward and said they know of 2 episodes that are in private hands, private collectors, and they won't give them back. Phil Morris, the same episode hunter, says he reckons he knows of 6 to 7 that are in private hands, and he's in negotiations, but it's a slow process. So Doctor Who fans can be assured there is at least 2 more episodes, probably 7, that are in private hands and might come back at some point. Interesting one, Prince of the Dalek Master Plan returned from Australia. Now, Dalek Master Plan was the only story not shown in Australia in its original run because it was deemed too violent and they couldn't edit it down to a child's time slot. Now, apparently this went to the censors, and the censors sent it to some Bond store or film storage, and it never got returned to the BBC, and no one actually knows what happened to it. And there's been rumours that it was in some secret, I don't know what it's meant to be, government archive where all the naughty stuff went, and has been there ever since. And there has been negotiations to try and get it out, but it's all apparently stuck in red tape as well. Another Australian one, and I guess I hear the Australian stuff because we're local. Australian underworld collector in witness protection returns episodes. Part of the Omni rumour was there were episodes in Australia, and some were held by the underbelly of Australian collecting. And one of these people had been approached and nearly gave them back, and then it all fell through. But he's impossible to contact and can't be tracked down because he's in witness protection and things like that. Whether that's true or whether that's all made up, I don't know. But that is a rumour that does seem to float from time to time. And then the last one we've got there, which is what you touched on earlier, technology will be invented to recover the original broadcast signals from space. And like I was saying to you, we can see the beginning of the universe now through the new James Webb universe. Who knows what will be invented and what they'll be able to pick up and recover. I don't hold my breath, but you never know.
Fingers crossed. I feel like it would be very fitting for Doctor Who episodes to be recovered from space. I feel like that is the most accurate and apt way for it to come back around.
Yes.
Sorry, Aowen has decided that she wants to join us just to say goodnight to everyone, essentially. Was there anything else you wanted to add, Aaron?
No, just thank everyone for joining us tonight. And next week we'll be looking at lost digital media and gaming.
Yes. No, it'll be very interesting to see what we pass on in the next round of this series. I'm sorry, I still have a migraine. It's very hard for me to form coherent sentences. But thank you very much for tuning in tonight. This has been a great episode, and we look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a good night.
Have a good night, guys. See you.